Welcome, everybody, to the Verts podcast. I am your host, Sonny Weaver, as always. Our guest today, you guys may know him under a different name. It's Brian Weedai. However, you guys probably know him as Pasta Padre, the man who's been running pastapadre.com for quite some time now. And we're going to get into that, as well as some of his other adventures. Brian, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thanks. I really appreciate you bringing me on here, Sonny.
No problem. So let's go first off to your website. Pastapadre.com. You've been running it for how long now?
It's been over 9 years. It's hard to believe, but yeah, I was just thinking about that actually. That next March it'll have been 10 years since I started it. It's just kind of a side project, and it grew into something much greater than that.
So when you say much greater than that, for any of you guys that aren't aware of this technology, if you go to the Wayback Machine, Google it after you listen to this. And you look back at your website, nine plus years ago, it was real basic blog where you kind of threw some thoughts and things up there. What's kind of been the evolution of it? I mean, what have been some of your own philosophical changes with how you've ran your website?
Yeah, so like I said, it kind of began as just a side project because at the time I was on staff at a site called sportsgamer.com, which later would be bought by GameSpot and then disappear. But I began getting frustrated with the way things were handled there, as far as it was a very rigid structure. It was set up as a media site essentially, so there were these complications as far as you had to get clearance to do certain things, to write certain things, an editor over top of you, whatever it might be. I wanted to get my thoughts out there immediately, and I wanted to cover the topics that I wanted to cover instead of what I would be assigned to do. So I began the site just to start throwing my opinions out there. And then the readership just kind of exploded after a little while. I was stunned by how many people, how many visitors I would be getting, and how quickly it just began to grow. And so, I started to put my attention more towards that direction. And it was just, I always felt like it was important to cover from both sides. So in the past, I actually worked as a game tester. I had been in various programs where you go into the studios and see the games and give your feedback and all that. So I had the media side of things, and I had also that side of things to give me multiple perspectives on news and analyzing things that were taking place in the industry. And I always felt it was important to have that freedom to cover these topics in a way that's relevant to consumers, because oftentimes you'll just get websites that regurgitate a press release, or they just send along the information that these publishers want consumers to hear. But I always felt it was important to also translate that into why it's relevant, or whether it's even factual information. So it was just something I wanted to do as far as the way to cover the industry and have that freedom to do it. And I could do that by running my own site.
You mentioned something in there about factual regurgitation, or if things are relevant. When you put your own should I say opinion or your own view on something, have you ever had any of the developers reach out to you about some of the things you've written?
I hear feedback sometimes, and I think less so. In a lot of the times it would be obviously off the record or whatever, but I've heard some things, and then often they stay out of it, because what I do usually, as far as when I cover the games in a certain way, I always want to hold not necessarily individual developers accountable, but the companies accountable for when they make promises and don't fulfill them, or marketing speak, and whether they're actually being honest. And that can make their jobs more difficult. That can make the PR people's jobs more difficult. It can make the developers' jobs more difficult, because they're being held to a standard. So, but mostly what I hear back is that they appreciate that I approach these subjects in a professional manner. I'm not calling people out. I'm not doing anything like that individually, but I'm also at the same time still standing up for kind of the consumer side of things. So yeah, you hear things back, and you take that feedback as you can, and you learn from it, and you learn from experiences just like in anything else.
You're probably most well known, and this is what brings up the nostalgia for most people. I think when they talk about pastapadre.com, your NCAA rosters, those go back a long time, and I know from my personal experience and many other people's personal experiences, NCAA you wouldn't start until you got the roster. So basically, EA would sell the game, and the game would basically sit there and collect dust for a week or so until you got the rosters out. And that is when everybody started playing. Tell us a little bit about, how that came about and where you kind of found the time or patience to even put those rosters together.
Well, oftentimes it wasn't me that put them together. I just distribute them. But that was, again, there was a time back there where a lot of people were also profiting off of them. So it was almost a scam in the way it was being run by a few certain individuals. So to me, it was important to spread those rosters in a way that people could get them for free if they wanted to donate to me, or they wanted to, I never even asked for donations. I didn't get any. But if they wanted to donate to the other people who put their time into the rosters also, that's great. But there were a lot of people who were being basically scammed out of their money on eBay, among other websites, from people who would just take the rosters from those who created them and then make money off of them. So to me, it was just about spreading those rosters to the widest possible audience, making sure people didn't pay for something they didn't need to pay for. And then that in itself enhanced the experience for those who played NCAA football, and because that was one of the first things people would look for when they fired up their game was the new rosters, and then EA eventually would open up roster sharing in their game and all of that. So it was just about enhancing the experience for as many people as possible.
10 years worth of being a part of the industry. Specifically, we'll kind of shift over here to Madden. Mm-hmm. You've been through a couple different development teams over those 10 years. Looking back at some of your older posts, you've obviously done some of the EA media days and things like that. Mm-hmm. What's the biggest difference from development teams from the last 10 years to where we are currently with this current staff with Rex and company?
In openness to consider ideas, and openness to share information, and to consider the complaints of the community and those out there. Because look, if you go back to Madden 06, Madden 07, Madden 08, you had development teams that did not. There was certainly a smaller presence of social media back then, but there were giant discussion areas like in various forums, but they didn't interact with community back then. They had these community days, which were essentially to create publicity for the game. It wasn't so much to get feedback on the game. And so at the time there wasn't this transparency. I think there's more transparency now, which leads to a better product. And that's what I see happening now is you get the sense that they're actually listening, they actually care, they want to create a better product. Now they've learned a lot from watching the way NBA 2K has developed, the way MLB The Show has developed, and because for the longest time there was this sense, and maybe it was the suits above, or certainly it was also some developers, that we need to create a game that attracts the casual gamer. But what you found with the NBA 2Ks and the MLBs of the world is that they really went for the simulation side of things first, the simulation gameplay, authenticity, and then they built out from there. And now Madden has kind of had to course correct, and every year you hear something like, oh, we're on a new 3-year plan, and it gets grating to hear that. But each time someone new comes in, they have their own vision, and that's what they're just trying to implement now. And I think the most encouraging thing about it is that they do actually listen and interact with people, whether it's not just media, it's people on Twitter, it's people on Facebook, on their forums, wherever it might be. So I think that's what's creating this situation now we're in with Madden, where it's actually improving at a much better rate than we saw in the past.
Something you said before we got on air here about there being less games actually now sports-wise for you to cover, and therefore you find yourself spending more time on the ones we do have.
Hmm.
There's obviously a contingent of Madden players, and we won't call them fans, we'll call them Madden players,
Hmm.
who like to look back at the 2K series specifically with kind of revisionist, rose-colored glasses and think it was without flaw. But without diving too deep into that, do you think the lack of competition may have, stifled Madden's improvement over the years, or do you think, it was maybe more the development team rather than the lack of competition itself?
Well, I think there's probably a mix of those two things, but what I've always looked at more than just the lack of competition, because look, NBA 2K really hasn't had competition in 6 years, and look where they are now. What happened with Madden, and I feel like this is kind of the case with exclusive licenses to begin with, is they have to deal with the NFL directly, and the NFL has such an oversight over the product that even if they come up with these grand ideas or these fun ideas, the NFL might nix them, and so you end up with a product that was vanilla. It was created to appeal to the widest possible audience, but what that meant was you had a product that was good in many areas but didn't excel in any areas. And you're seeing them kind of get out of that now, but even still, the NFL holds such power over what's going to be in the product, what's approved, what is nixed, that that I think has kept the game from becoming as good as it could have been, more so than just being the only NFL game on the market.
In 10 years of covering Madden as well as other games, have you noticed a big change in the communities themselves, specifically Madden, from maybe those '06 games to where we're at now as far as community involvement and just the general attitude of the community itself?
Yeah, they're not. I think there's not as much passion from the community, and certainly they've been fractured, and part of that is because the games have been fractured themselves in terms of feature sets. So you have the ultimate team gamer versus the franchise gamer versus the online gamer. So you don't really have everybody sharing in the same experience. But also there is this sense of, uh, the number of people who buy Madden is it's down. It's gone down over the years, and now they've continued to make more money by bringing in these revenue generating modes, but it's not as passionate. You don't see the huge. You remember the Madden release days, how they were like a huge event. It's not really like that anymore. So I think the passion of the community has certainly tailed off, uh, and that's due in part to years where the quality was poor, and also due in part to just a fracture in what people actually play within the product.
Yeah, I think what you've seen is it's almost turned into an us versus them when you look at franchise CFM groups versus the Ultimate Team groups. I think a lot of times people look to the Ultimate Team group as the casual gamer that wants to pay to win, and that I'm not sure what that's done for the community, but to me, I think that's caused a lot of animosity, and there's a lot of infighting amongst gamers, not even about what the actual gameplay features are. They're always worried about what's coming to their specific side
Mhm.
of the game itself.
Yeah, and that's because resources are limited. So they're going to put development time into what they deem is going to do the most good for them, short term, and long term. And I always go back to, though, when there's people who complain about Ultimate Team and why that's become kind of the focus over the last few years, is that, again, the development costs of these games have risen to an extraordinary level, and there's fewer games than ever before. And so they have to find a way to survive in this marketplace. And if we didn't have these outlets for publishers to gain extra digital revenue, we'd have even fewer games. We probably wouldn't have an NHL game. We'd have only one NBA game. We'd there'd probably only be one soccer game. There would be fewer games even then, and then some of those games might even be in danger of surviving for over the next few years. So it's a necessary evil, even if you're a franchise guy. That Ultimate Team's in there, and you just hope that the EAs of the world will take that money they're making and reinvest it in other areas of the game, because these games can't survive just on Ultimate Team. They need people to actually buy the game first, and in order to get to Ultimate Team. So you have to give them other stuff to play in there also, and you have to appeal to the people who maybe aren't interested in those type of modes.
Yeah, that's an interesting comment you made about having to get them to buy the game first. There've been some rumors circulating about, what if they made you pay for expanded version of CMF or CFM. At some point you think you're paying $60 for something, right? And whether it's Ultimate Team or some sort of advanced CFM, you hope your money's going towards something when you open the box and not have to keep paying for it. And I'm worried, and I think there's a decent amount of worry amongst the community that everything is going to microtransactions, that they're maybe almost forgetting that your customers bought the game in the first place.
Mm-hmm. And I think the major difference between the Ultimate Teams versus a system where they come up with a way for you to pay into franchise mode would be that franchise mode has been a part of the product for forever practically. It's a core mode, it's a legacy mode, whereas Ultimate Team was something new they added in along with that kind of pay structure to it. So consumers are more welcoming of something new that involves paying as opposed to something old that involves paying. And that's going to be the difference. Or you're going to end up with a subscription type model for your sports games where you aren't paying $60 necessarily per game. You're paying $100, $120 for a year subscription to every EA Sports game, or they go free to play, which I think might be what they're going to do with NBA Live. Free to play, get people in the door for free, and then get the money from them through those type of modes. And then people can't really complain as much about it if they didn't have to pay to get in to begin with. And you see that working on mobile right now for companies like EA.
Very interesting business model. So rolling kind of back into just the game itself, 10 years, and I know a lot of us have played the game for that span. Some huge advancements. Some people may say some huge failures in there as well. If you had to pick kind of the one thing that you've seen develop over the span, what's been the greatest achievement for Madden over the last 10 years?
Well, again, I think having to appeal to a large group of consumers has limited them in some sense. I'm a big fan of online franchise. I think what they did with franchise mode when they turned it into connected franchise was really remarkable in that they could apply improvements centrally that would work within multiple different ways to play. I thought that right there was really huge, and they've just continued to over the past several years refine the gameplay, and they're kind of attacking it in specific areas year to year, as opposed to you're not going to get everything in one year, obviously. But it's any annual game is just going to be incremental in that way. So it's hard to say like they've broken through with something. Madden isn't really the game that's innovated, other than, like I said, the way they structured their franchise mode. Again, that's probably a limitation of the NFL license. So, but they've taken steps, especially the past 4 or 5 years, to really move the product in the right direction.
So, you mentioned the possible NFL stifling of the advancements. Where is Madden lacking? We've heard some rumors, obviously in 17, that they're finally, after a long time, going to address some things with special teams and make special teams an actual part of the game, whereas before it seemed like it was just kind of there. They're looking to engage in that. But where do you think we're still lagging behind, maybe from other games, whether it's 2K or MLB The Show? Where's Madden still lagging behind?
Yeah, and special teams definitely is one. That's something I've been talking about, it seems like, for a decade. So it's encouraging to see that. Compared to the other games, what they've really lacked in, I think, is presentation. I'll say two things. Presentation is still way behind the competition. That includes commentary. I can't take much more of Phil Simms. um, but commentary is a tough thing for any developer to nail. So I give a little leeway on that. I think authenticity is another thing. Uh, you see games like NBA 2K and the show really excel in terms of they just feel authentic. They feel like they're sports. Madden feels a little more like it's I don't want to say arcade. It straddles arcade and sim, and again, that's because they're trying to appeal to everyone instead of just the hardcore kind of fans of the sport. That's easier to do with basketball and baseball, I think. But yeah, I'd say authenticity and presentation are kind of the biggest areas where they've dragged behind.
Let's talk about some of the other projects you work on. Obviously, we hit on Pasta Padre, but you're also the co-founder of Hit the Pass. Now, tell us kind of about what that is and what you guys do over there.
Yeah, Hit the Pass is something we launched last year, almost a year ago now. It's hard to believe. I co-founded that with Rich Grisham, and really we had this idea to do another website. We wanted to do something that was more about original content. It was more about positivity, and it was a way to kind of promote the way that we enjoy the games, as opposed to a Pasta Padre site where it's a lot about news and analysis, or wherever else might be covering games. It's a lot more about just news and reviews and stuff. And so that wasn't we wanted to do something different with Hit the Pass and kind of create that positive way of, hey, we actually enjoy the games. Sometimes it seems like all we do is nitpick games, but we actually enjoy them, and we find unique, different ways to enjoy them, and that's what we wanted to celebrate with Hit the Pass.
Scrolling through one of the other many things you tend to do, you're a contributor with the Sporting News. Now, the Sporting News isn't just a video game website. In fact, it's more general news. So how do you kind of fit in there, and how did you come to be associated with that?
Yeah, so that's something I really enjoy, actually, is Sporting News, because it reaches a large audience, but it's an audience of sports fans who maybe necessarily aren't video game fans. They're not necessarily the people who are going to visit a website that gives you video game news every day. So what I do is I try to reach them. It's content that's very different from what I do on Pasta Padre, or a little more similar to Hit the Pass, but it's tying in sports games with the sports world. That's what I try to do there more, is find relevant ways that they intersect, and that's been really fun. And the response I get there is really exceptional. So yeah, I mean, they brought me on, it was last January, and it was just they wanted to enhance their video game coverage because they didn't really have that presence. And so I've come on there and I've tried to find different ways to reach those people who read Sporting News or who follow them on social media, and it's been a lot of fun, actually. It's a cool challenge.
You're kind of in this weird middle ground when you think of the future of sports and gaming itself. You cover sports games and you cover gaming for Sporting News, but where is there, and your stance for that matter, on eSports as they start? You're seeing a shift here as ESPN and some of these different channels get ready to promote it, and they're talking about video games as sport. Does that fall in your realm of coverage, or how do you kind of feel about that?
It could. I think sports games have a tough road in that regard. Sports games are replicating something people already watch on TV, as opposed to games like League of Legends, which you don't see that anywhere else, right? You're watching people play something at the highest level, but if you were watching sports, you're going to watch them play at the highest level, first of all, by watching NFL games or NBA games, whatever it might be. So it's kind of a tier below, and the developers are way behind as far as integrating their games in. Now, EA's done a lot of good actually this past year with modes like their Draft Champions mode, finding ways to kind of start to move into esports. I don't, it's hard to say, but I don't really see it catching on in the way that other games like League of Legends or whatever it might be, how they've gotten extremely popular in the esports world, and they get millions of people watching and interacting and all of that. And sports, I just think it's going to be a little tougher, and it's going to take a little more time. And but it's another possible revenue source for publishers. So they're absolutely gonna put a lot of effort into that.
Yeah, that'll be something interesting to watch as we move forward. And like I said, they gain more publicity as you start seeing them on some of these network channels. That's all the time we're actually going to have today to talk with Brian. Brian, we're going to have to get you on again sometime, some really interesting stuff. But I know we've enjoyed having you and can't wait to get you back.
Oh, Sonny, it's a lot of fun. Thanks. I'm happy to come on anytime.
That was Brian Weedeye, a.k.a. Pasta Padre. A lot of good stuff there, some interesting insights. As somebody who's been in the industry for over 10 years, getting to see different things as far as different games come and go and the effects of Madden itself on the gaming community. We'll have to get Brian back because there's a lot more to be discussed there. That's all the time we're going to have for today here on the 4Verts podcast. Make sure you follow us on Twitter at T4Verts. Also subscribe here to the NBL Network YouTube channel. There's going to be a lot more good content, especially here as we get ready for the next Madden rollout. As always, I've been your host, Sonny Weaver. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.